Neuromuscular conditions can have a significant impact on a person's ability to swallow and, as a result, their nutrition. Working as a PA with someone with this kind of condition, it's likely that you'll be helping them with their food. It's important to understand the challenges they may face. Joe Pent is a highly specialist speech and language therapist who supports people with issues associated with all the mechanisms in the throat.
We use our tongue, lips and teeth to prepare the food, and we mix that up to form a bolus of food. And it's really important that that bolus is nice and soft and smooth so that we can then safely swallow it. We have an automatic reflex which is triggered at the back of our mouth to cause a swallow action. When we swallow, it's really important that our airway is closed off at that same time. So when we swallow, a number of physical changes needs to happen. So our voice box comes up and is raised. A flap goes over the top of our airways called the epiglottis, and that closes off our airways. The back of our throat, called the pharynx, squashes in to make the area smaller, and it also lifts the soft bit at the back of our palate up and squashes in to close off our nose. And all those things at the same time as the food being triggered to go down the back of our mouth will push that food down towards our food pipe and make sure it bypasses our airway. Involved in that process is about 50 pairs of muscles and nerves. So they all work as a team together to make sure that that is all coordinated and synchronized to make sure the food bolus goes down into the food pipe instead of the airway.
Neuromuscular conditions affect muscles all over the body, including the mouth, neck, and throat.
There are a number of different factors associated with neuromuscular conditions that can affect eating and drinking. And because there are so many muscles and nerves involved in the process of preparing the food, so chewing and getting it ready to be swallowed safely, but also the act of swallowing, all those mechanisms working in a synchronized way, it's often that neuromuscular conditions and the factors associated with this can start to impact on eating and drinking at either the chewing phase or the swallow or both. So, for example, things like weakened or uncoordinated muscles can mean that either the airway isn't completely closed off in that moment of swallowing, or that someone might not be able to have the strength in their muscles to chew the food up well enough to prepare. So that might happen from the start of trying to eat or drink, or it might be that actually it happens after a period of time where those team of muscles are trying to work together in a synchronized team way, that they start to get tired, because chewing is a repetitive action and because swallowing is a repetitive action. When we do that action over and over again, we're putting quite a demand on those muscles to work in that synchronized way each time.
Issues with swallowing and with breathing are closely related.
The other thing that can have an impact is respiratory conditions. When we eat and drink, we need to close off our airway each time we swallow, but also we're not breathing to our full capacity when we're chewing and preparing food as well. If you're running out of air because you haven't got the capacity to fill your lungs to the full extent, or your muscles get weak when you're breathing and you're not filling your lungs to the full capacity, you're more likely to miss time when you need to take a breath and when at the point of swallowing. If you're getting a build-up of air in your stomach because you're having to gulp air, or if your digestive system isn't working quite as well because your muscle function is affected, you might get a feeling of trapped wind or discomfort from that. And that can make you feel full before you're ready. So aspiration is when food particles or liquid particles from your drink enter the airway by mistake. Before that point, we might have what's called laryngeal penetration, which is that food or drink particles enter the top area of the airway, but get as far as our vocal folds, but don't necessarily enter our airways. So we might get symptoms where our voice starts to sound a bit wet or bubbly, or we get a sensation of irritation, which makes us want to cough. If someone is aspirating, so food particles or liquid is going down into their airway, this can increase their risks of getting a chest infection, which can lead to aspiratory pneumonia, which is a very serious, life-threatening condition.
Sarah Rose has Ulrich's congenital muscular dystrophy, and the muscles affected mean that eating and drinking can be hard for her.
If I was to aspirate on food or liquid, it's usually because of the timing issue of swallowing and breathing. I know straight away that it's happened. Depending on how big a breath intake is, and also the type of food, it can cause more problems. If it goes quite deep, then it can take longer to cough back up.
Common signs of aspiration might include someone coughing during or immediately after eating or drinking, becoming watery-eyed or going red in the face, becoming breathless, or their voice becoming wet or gurgly in sound. Some people might have digestive difficulties that impact on their eating and drinking as well. Reflux is a condition where the stomach contents comes back up. So if material is coming up from our food pipe, it can, and we're not actively doing anything with it, we're not actively swallowing, then it can just tip into our airway. Choking is when we have an obstruction of our airway. We can have a complete obstruction of our airway, which means that we can't get any air through to breathe.
So when I eat, I have to be really vigilant as to not having any distractions and really concentrating on chewing and swallowing at the right time. I ask my PAs not to ask me anything or talk to me during that time.
Whether someone has got a partial or complete obstruction to their airway, this can be life-threatening. So it's really important that in the first instance, we try and avoid where possible this happening in the first place. But if it does occur, that action is taken as soon as possible to clear that airway.
How best to act when someone with a neuromuscular condition is choking is very specific to the individual. You will be taught what to do in this situation for the person you're working with.
It can be scary, not all the time, because it can also depend on my level of difficulty at that moment as to how difficult it is to get rid of. When things form a plug, then I find that can be quite frightening experience. I'm also aware that it's frightening for whoever is with me, which is why I make sure that they're prepared, that they know what to do.
There are plenty of ways to help to avoid the effects we've just talked about.
Posture is really important because it enables a person to have their anatomy in the right place in order for food to be channeled in the right position down into their stomach rather than anywhere else. If they're sloped forward or to one side, then that affects where everything is.
The other important factor for me is the position that I'm in. So I need to have my head in the right position, forward leaning, because I can't swallow easily if I'm led back.
Oral hygiene can have a big impact on increasing someone's risk of getting respiratory pneumonia. If someone has poor oral hygiene, they're not cleaning their teeth regularly and thoroughly enough, those bugs in their mouth will be taken down with any food or drink particles when they aspirate.
Types of food and the way it's cooked can make a huge difference to the issues we're talking about here.
If someone has a difficulty with chewing and preparing food to safely swallow, then often we think about how that food can be modified and made easier to prepare ready for swallowing.
John Ray Hasty has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The progression of Duchenne means that John adapts what and how he eats over time.
Increasingly recently, I've had more difficulty with chewing and swallowing. So the muscles in my mouth and jaw for chewing and the muscles in my throat for swallowing, they're now significantly weakened. So it does make it harder. What that means for me is I've just made some adaptations to my diet. So I find that the more I have to chew, then the harder it gets to do it. So I try to limit the chewing to where it's needed. So for example, at breakfast, I'll have a liquid kind of smoothie breakfast, and at lunchtime I'll often have a soup. And then that means I've got enough energy to have a solid meal in the evening.
If it's not well cooked, stringy green beans and things like that can be quite fibrous and hard to have the chewing skills to break down.
And sometimes I have to think about how to increase the calories, but also keep it healthy. And that can be a difficult balance to strike.
Thinking about softer foods, they're often easier to manage because they take less chewing action to break down. So things like pastas, make things with lots of additional sauces added can help with that chewing process to prepare food. It's so individual in terms of people's skills and abilities.
Sometimes, although a person may be able to coordinate chewing and swallowing for a short time, their muscles may fatigue easily.
If someone is finding it difficult to eat large quantities of food because they are getting tired, they're finding it difficult to eat for long periods of time, and it is actually taking them a long period of time to eat, then it might be that the dietitian would recommend trying to get as many calories into smaller amounts of meals. So they might suggest what's called fortifying a meal. So adding things that are going to be rich in calories and nutrition.
Ross Hovey has spinal muscular atrophy. He explains the downfalls of putting on too much weight.
But what is worth understanding is people who are, let's say, in the more unfortunate bracket where they easily put on weight, that again has a massive impact. So the heavier their arm is, the heavier it is to lift with a weaker muscle. The heavier their chest is, the heavier it is to breathe, especially when lying down.
For other people, a fortified diet will still not enable them to get enough calories.
So if someone isn't able to maintain adequate nutrition, they invariably will be under the care of a qualified dietitian to look at how they can make sure they can get adequate nutrition. So that might be additional supplements that they have at other times of the day when they're not having their meals, or it might be a particular pudding that's packed full of calories that they have in addition to their meals. And as I say, that would be prescribed by a qualified dietitian.
As well as calories, getting enough fluids is important. Hydration is important for many things, such as blood, joint, and organ functions, temperature regulation, skin integrity, and fighting infection. It also impacts sleep quality, cognition, and mood.
Drinking fluids can be quite challenging because it requires us to use our muscles in that synchronized way at a very fast speed. So being able to sort of control that liquid before it goes down to be swallowed is quite a skilled process. So sometimes people might have difficulty managing the speed of that liquid. There are a number of different things that might be suggested by a qualified trained speech language therapist to help manage the pace of those fluids.
I tried using thickeners in drinks, tips. I didn't really notice it was a huge help. And when I went for a fluoroscopy to see what was actually going on, they decided that it was probably more of a risk if I did. So I went back to using thinner this water, mainly, or tea, because there was too much leakage where I can't close the epiglottis properly. So, yeah, the thickening food, the thickened water was causing things to flow back up too much. So it was very much trial and error with the liquid.
Some people may find eating and swallowing so difficult that they need medical intervention to help them get the nutrition they need.
It might be that that person isn't able to maintain a healthy nutritional intake just from their oral intake, in which case the team around the individual would work with them to decide whether alternative feeding systems might need to be put in place. So some people might have a tube initially going down their nose into their stomach called an NG tube. This is usually used in temporary situations for most people, and it's a way of getting nutrition into the person as soon as possible to just make sure that they stay healthy and well nourished. It might be that the person has what's called a PEG, which is a tube that gives the person their nutrition directly through into their stomach.
Fitting a PEG requires surgery. If the person you're working with has a PEG, then you'll receive specific training in looking after that.
So it might be that your experience of eating or drinking is becoming quite a negative experience because you might feel anxious that something might go down the wrong way or that is becoming stuck. And that can have a negative impact on how you view meal times and how much you want to eat at those meal times.
In everything we've talked about here, there may not be a perfect or right solution for the person you're working with.
It's really important when you're supporting a person that you consider that they are an individual who has their own individual rights, choices, and needs and preferences. It may well be that that individual is well aware of the risks associated with eating and drinking, well aware of their needs to eat more to maintain a healthy weight.
In this module, we've talked about how we swallow, how neuromuscular conditions affect swallowing, and how breathing and swallowing are interrelated. We've seen some of the effects of weak swallowing muscle, the importance of nutrition and hydration, and how people with neuromuscular conditions avoid risk and plan what to do if something goes wrong. We've looked at the types of food, liquids, and nutrition which are easier to eat and drink, and some of the medical interventions that may be used to ensure good nutrition.